Yeah, so I want to pause first and address something that Charles was just talking about, and that is this concept of adaptive capacity, which is really which applies to both ecological systems, but also to human systems and where the two meet. And that is that we have, by changing the face of the planet, we've done a remarkably good job of diminishing the adaptive capacity of the planet in response to climate change. The climate change we're seeing right now is much faster than most previous climate change, so that means it's an even greater adaptive challenge. But we've put up even more substantial blocks to this. I love thinking about New Orleans and Hurricane Katrina as a great example of how we completely diminished a city and a system's adaptive capacity to the types of events that are related to climate change, and that we got rid of pretty much the effective coastal wetlands. We built these hard barriers, and we made it so that the system didn't stand a chance in the face of the kind of storm event that we knew would eventually hit, quite frankly, with or without climate change, but probably at a greater magnitude than it did otherwise. So thinking about this adaptive capacity has become incredibly important, and the time frame for when we have to think about it and help build it, and I like to think about it in terms of the term resilience, because I think that we're not going to be able to actually focus the way things adapt, but because we don't know exactly how the systems are going to change. But by increasing resilience, we can make it so that systems have a better range, be they human systems or ecological systems, to respond to climate change. We can let them take advantage of whatever hidden capacity they have. Much as we don't know all the answers to climatology and what's going to happen, I like to point out that even more so, we actually have no idea how ecological systems work. As an ecologist, if I get if I get a confidence interval in an experiment that's like 20%, I can say that I've found something, which I just find hysterical when you compare it to other sciences. But that's how little we know about ecological systems, which in some ways means that there might be great surprises and systems may be able to take more than we think they can. But it also might mean that they're much more sensitive than we think they are. But these effects we see absolutely around the world now. Climate change is not something of the future, and this is a real dilemma in conservation right now. In the conservation world, I still have colleagues that tell me that there are more pressing threats to the work that they're doing than climate change, and they'll worry about climate change in 20 or 30 years, to which I stand up and say, but everything that's going on now is already the impacts of climate change, and you're compounding it with these other things. So anyone can call out anywhere on the planet, and I can tell you a climatological impact on an ecological system there. You can look at either one of the poles, which have clearly been the places of faster climate change, and you can see effects on all of the charismatic fauna there. In the Arctic, you have polar bears that are decreasing in weight and therefore decreasing their fecundity. In the Antarctic, I was just down there studying some penguins, and the snow is actually landing on the nests while the penguins are there trying to bring the next cohort to age, and they're not going to make it. I mean, they're literally under 3 feet of snow with little air holes poking out, or they're sitting on top of 6 feet of snow hoping to have a successful nest, and it's not going to work. Right around here, there's the story of the American pika, which is a high-elevation lagomorph, which is a rabbit-like thing for some people. People from the city always tell me they look like rats, but they're so much cuter, although rats are darn cute themselves. And they're disappearing from this high-elevation talus habitat that they live in because it's simply getting too warm. They have a very low threshold for thermal change. They actually were experiments done in the earlier part of the century where people moved them down slope, and they literally keeled over from the heat. So we're seeing those populations already shifting up, some of them disappearing. They're disappearing from south-facing slopes. There's a very clear climate signature in that disappearance. In the world's oceans, we see the effects of coral bleaching. We see ocean acidification, which is something that when I was an intro marine biology student in the 80s, I was told, don't you worry about ocean pH in any experiment you do. That's not going to change. The buffering capacity of the ocean is tremendous. Well, turns out that's not true, and the problem is that because it turns out that's not true, nobody has done the research to say what are going to be the effects of an acidified ocean. We have great freshwater examples because we already learned that those systems acidify quite nicely, but now we're sort of left at a loss for what that means for the oceans. But all of this says that we have to really be thinking about how do we manage for these kinds of changes? How do we plan for coastal wetlands with both sea level rise and altered precipitation runoff and the human development that's going on around them? Because as we respond to climate change for as a conservation biologist, human communities are responding to climate change at the same time, and sometimes not in agreeable manners. So you have people that are building more dams, which is probably going to be a lot of what happens in the western United States, because as rainfall becomes less plentiful, or you shift from more rain and less snow, you build more dams. Well, how does that affect all of these salmonids, these salmon species that we've spent decades trying to remove the dams from these rivers so that they can function again? So that is just going to be an increasingly challenging mix. And as a conservation biologist, my feeling is I want to see conservation issues early in that planning, so that we have this more holistic future, because conservation biodiversity will be the first thing to lose out in all of this planning. We will always worry about how do the people of Vancouver get water before we worry about what happens to the golden toad.